Hello YouTube, it's Bobby with Madness Labs. Happy Friday, or what's left of it. And I'm just following up after last Madness Cast, episode 5. We went over Firebase Firestore and using that with our Stencil application. And we had a question on YouTube, and rather than try to reply with text, we wanted to actually illustrate kind of what was going on, and then also preview what's coming up in the next Madness Cast. So the question this week, and if this becomes something useful, we plan to do this on all of our Madness casts. Get your guys' questions, your comments, and then address them in maybe a follow-up video. But this week's question comes from AJ Mercer on YouTube, and AJ asked, AJ asks, why don't you like binding to state? Will updating input cause render to fire? Well, AJ, you are just so in luck. We are going to actually find out. So let's pull up the project here. And you can see I've got the project up, and I'm going to get rid of my ugly mug. So, okay, we've got the documentation link that AJ was so nice to provide in his comment. And here you can see this is kind of the traditional example of how we would hook up our form inputs to the state. So we've got an input down here, and every time we change the input, it's going to fire an event, and then we're going to update the state with the event value, and then we then bind the value of the input to the state. So this is a really standard and clean implementation to do data binding. However, every time Stencil sets a state value, it will actually go about re-rendering the page. So in our case, if in this case that they're illustrating here, this will actually cause a render to fire every single time they update the input. So we can see this in action if we actually go into our application here, and over here on the left, this is where we left off on the last Madness cast. I'm going to go above the return in the render method, and I'm going to go ahead and do a console log. So as you'll probably hear me say a million times through this series and all our videos, when in doubt, console log it out. Okay, I render red. Okay, so I rendered, and now what you're going to see is when I save and I reload over here, we will see that our console is telling us that I rendered, and it says it twice. And so the first time is because of the fact that we actually load the component, and then the second time was when the app data came back and it actually filled into our component. So those are the two renders that we have going. But as you can see, if I update my forms, nothing happens. The component doesn't render. So what I can do to actually make it render though is I'm going to come here at the top and I'm going to add a new state property. I'm going to call it name, and it's going to be a string. And we're going to go down here and we're going to bind our input just like we saw in the documentation. So we're going to say this, our value equals this dot name, and on input, we're going to do a event and pass it through to this dot on input and event. And now we're going to make our method on input event, this dot name equals event dot target dot value. So now every time we update the form field, it's going to then update the state name value, and then that's going to then bind to the value of the field. So what that's going to cause is we're going to still get our two renders that we got before, but every time we update this form field, we're going to get an update, a render to fire. And so generally, in development, the more events, the more renders, the more paints that we have on the DOM, the slower our application is going to get. If this was necessary, we had like some place on the screen where this was needed to fill in somewhere, this would be generally okay. However, I'm a big fan of being as efficient as I possibly can, and so I actually chose in this case just to use the submit event on the form and then grab all my inputs there. So we can stop it from rendering because, as I said before, when the state actually, when the state properties are set, it will actually cause the render. But if you change a state value, then it won't actually cause a render to happen. And that's just kind of how Stencil is currently designed. So I'll show you how that works. So if we go to the top here and we change our state item from being maybe from name to something more generic like form data, and then I change this to be any, and we're going to make it equal to an empty object starting out. And then down here, I'm going to say form data dot name. And now every time we update, and I probably want to update this as well, form data dot name. So now every time we update our input, it's going to set an object name key equal to the value. And so we're going to get our two renders just like we got before. And then this time, if we type in, you'll notice that we don't get the render to fire. So it's still saved to our state, but because we're not setting a new value on the state or resetting the value in this case, it's not going to cause the render to fire. However, again, we're still binding to the input of the input. So it's still going to fire a bunch of events that are going to bubble up the DOM. So we probably still want to stick with the on form submit. So hopefully that answers your question, AJ. And thanks for commenting and giving us all the Twitter love. We really appreciate it. And again, hopefully this was helpful. And if it was, please like, subscribe, share this video. And as always, you can catch us Tuesdays at 5 p.m. CST for our Madness casts. And AJ, you are a very lucky man. Not only are we going to answer your question like we did today, we're going to do the video suggestion that you had. So this next Madness cast on Tuesday will be about using Firestore to store data offline. And then when you get back online, it just syncs it back up and everything's a-okay. So that's going to be our next Madness cast. Hopefully this was helpful to you guys. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we will see you guys on Tuesday. Peace.